In the most flawless heist in history, no one wore a mask. No one drew a gun. Why? Because this robbery was completely legal. The victims signed their own death warrant with trembling hands, all by themselves. A single signature. And with that signature, a piece of land larger than Western Europe changed hands. Do you know for how much Russia sold the oil, the gold, and the continental dominance that is today worth over $200 billion? For only $7.2 million, that means 2 cents an acre. They sold a massive territory for the price of a luxury apartment in Manhattan today. So, why did the Russian Tsar commit such an act of madness? Did he wake up one morning and say, "Alaska's too cold, let's just sell it"? Was he stupid? Or was he desperate? To find the answer, we must go back to that night where it all began. The year is 1867. We are in the freezing cold of St. Petersburg, inside a dimly lit room at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Outside, the wind is beating against the palace windows. Inside, the fireplaces are roaring. The men in the room are not ordinary bureaucrats. The very top of the empire is there. The Tsar's brother, the Grand Duke, the ministers. All eyes are locked onto a giant map on the wall. Their gaze is fixed on that massive land in the top left corner of North America, Russian America, or, as we know it, Alaska. Today, when we look at that map, what do we see? Endless forests, oil wells, strategic bases. But that night the men in that room didn't see a fortune. When they looked at the map, they saw only a liability, a trap, and a promissory note they couldn't pay. The Grand Duke tapped his finger on the map and uttered that historic sentence. "This place is not an opportunity for us, it is a nightmare. If we don't sell it to the Americans now, we will lose it to the British for free." Can you believe it? A continent-sized piece of land was about to change hands for the price of a few luxury apartments. To a modern observer, this looks like insanity. What empire sells its own soil? The answer is simple: an empire going bankrupt. To understand why Russia was this desperate, we need to rewind the film a bit to 1856. Russia had just emerged from the Crimean War, and the result was a total disaster. The giant Russian bear, which had been the nightmare of Europe for centuries, was revealed to be old and sick. The British and the French had beaten the Russians in their own backyard. Why? Because of the technology gap. While the Russian soldier held a grandfather's rifle, the British came with modern weapons. While Russian ships waited for the wind, the British steamships tore the Russian fleet apart. But the real blow wasn't taken on the front lines, but in the treasury. War is expensive business. To finance this war, Russia made 2 deadly mistakes. First, they printed money like crazy, and the ruble became trash. Second, Russia borrowed from its enemies, from the banks of London and Paris. When the war ended, the treasury was empty. Rats were running wild in the coffers. Half of the state budget was going just to pay the interest on debts. When the new Tsar Alexander II took the throne, he inherited a wreck. He wanted to save the country. He needed railroads. He needed factories. But for all of that, he needed money. And no one lends money to a losing empire. Their credit rating was junk. The Rothschilds, the Baring brothers. Europe's financial barons had turned off the taps. Money first, then debt, they said. And Alaska came to the table in exactly this moment of desperation. Of course, it wasn't just about money. There was also fear. When Grand Duke Constantine looked at the map, he saw a nightmare. Who is Alaska's neighbor? Canada. Who owns Canada? The British. The British Navy, the ruler of the oceans, could invade Alaska without firing a single bullet. The Russians came up with a brilliant idea. Let's sell this place to the Americans. Let's plant a strong rival right under the British's nose. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. The plan looked great on paper. But there was a small problem. The Americans didn't want Alaska. Yes, they didn't want it. The Russian ambassador Steckel was wandering around Washington not like a diplomat, but like a salesman trying to offload dead stock. The Americans had just emerged from the Civil War. They were tired and in debt. The public was mocking Alaska. "What are we going to do with it? Is it a polar bear garden?" they asked. But Steckel was lucky. Facing him was a dreamer of a Secretary of State, William Seward. The two sat down at a poker table. Steckel played Seward's ego perfectly, and finally they agreed. $7.2 million. The Russians were over the moon. They got more than they expected. But there was a condition. The signature had to be signed immediately. The deal had to be done before Congress woke up. March 29th, 1867. In the middle of the night, diplomats were dragged out of their beds. The gas lamps in the State Department were lit. And in that dim light, the fate of tens of thousands of natives living in Alaska was drawn without a single one of them being at the table. As if transferring a farm, they sold a whole people from one empire to another. At 4 o'clock in the morning, while the freezing cold reigned outside and before even the birds had woken up, the signatures were inked. Seward thought he had secured America's safety. The Russians thought they had postponed bankruptcy. A single-sentence telegram went to St. Petersburg. Signed. $7.2 million. But wait, the real disgrace starts now. Signing is easy, collecting the money is hard. The American Congress refused to pay. "We have no money, we won't buy an ice block," they said. The Russian ambassador Stokel panicked. He had promised the money to the Tsar. If he returned empty-handed, his life was over. And do you know what he did? He handed out bribes. Yes, you heard that right. To sell its own property, Russia distributed bags of money to American congressmen and journalists. It is estimated that $100,000 of that $7.2 million went to bribes. What irony! The authoritarian Russian Tsar was buying democratic American votes with money. So, did this money save Russia? The money was transferred to banks in London, converted into gold, and it went as quickly as it came. Almost all of it was poured into Russia's railway debts and interest payments. In other words, Russia sold its future. In exchange, it only bought a few more years of not going bankrupt. They put a band-aid on a gangrenous arm. History loves to mock those who think short-term, my friends. Only 30 years after the sale, a piece of gold was found in the Yukon River. The gold rush began. From that icebox, America extracted 100 times the money it paid to Russia. Then oil was found. Billions of barrels. But there was something more painful than money. When the Cold War started, Russia paid the real price of the land it sold. America placed its nuclear missiles and radar bases in Alaska. Russia had placed its enemy right under its own nose with its own hands. The planes taking off from the lands their grandfathers sold for 2 cents were now threatening their grandsons. Today, when you look at the Bering Strait, you see two different worlds. On one side, a poor Russian coast. On the other, a wealthy and strategic Alaska. This story teaches us this: empires are not always destroyed by defeats on the battlefield. Sometimes a single signature loses more territory than thousands of soldiers. The Tsar and his ministers focused only on saving today. They were scared of the red numbers on the balance sheet. But what they couldn't see was this: the most dangerous weapon is not a cannon or a rifle, but a promissory note that has come due. And the greatest defeat for a state is not losing a war, but losing its vision. In the dusty pages of history, there are many more invisible bankruptcy stories like this one. And on this channel, we will continue to blow the dust off these pages and tell their stories. If you want to hear stories unearthed from the dusty pages of history, make sure to subscribe. Because those who do not know the mistakes of the past cannot see the traps of today. See you in the next video. Goodbye.